Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Melanated Movement Sex Positivity Virtual Roundtable. My name is Ashley Cobb. I am your favorite friend in filth, and I am here today joined by some lovely ladies to discuss all things sex. Hello, ladies.
Hi everybody.
Hi.
Hello,
Um,
hello.
can you introduce yourselves to your audience so we all know who is here?
All right, well, my picture's on top, so I guess I'll start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's conversation. Just a brief introduction. I am native to Atlanta, and I consider myself an advocate for social justice. I found a sweet spot in the area of reproductive justice and Black women's health. I humbly have been recognized and accepted as an ally for women living with HIV, and I've dedicated the last 5 years of my career to making a difference in health outcomes for Black women. I'm a graduate of Georgia State University with a background in insurance and real estate before I made the transition over to social justice. And I'm also a wife and a mom, and I enjoy singing when I'm not doing advocacy work. And I'll pass it over to my colleague.
Does that mean I go next?
That's you.
Hey. Hi, everyone. My name is Allanah Lewis Sherry, or Shaquila if you're nice, but I go by Allanah. I'm a program manager at Grady Health Systems. I've been doing advocacy work. I've been working with the vulnerable population for a while, and I have transitioned over to working with those with HIV. I feel like there is human access to basic human rights has, for whatever reason, the healthcare system has been completely left out. This is my passion, my work. Right now, I'm working with those populations out of the Grady Health System, particularly with both women and men who are living with HIV of the melanated complexion. I too are a mom of two and a wife. I have my master's in public health, and I feel like now I'm running on chatting about myself. But I'm excited to be here. As you all can tell, I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight, and I'm going to pass it on to Miss Williams.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brit Williams. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm an assistant professor of higher education administration at the University of Vermont, where I'm training the next generation of educational leaders to think about students and their experiences in the totality of who they are. In terms of my work that's most connected to today, I'm a personal PrEP user, which I'll talk a little bit about as we move through this conversation. And I also do some research and work at the nexus of education and health with particular attention to health disparities for melanated populations and a specific focus on Black women and girls, because all we got is we and us, and ain't nobody else gonna save us. When I'm not working and doing all of those things, you can find me binge watching TV. I love me some strong women leads, especially if they sex positive. If it's about sex, it's for me. So I'm delighted for tonight's conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get started. So we are here to talk about sex positivity, but many might not know exactly what that means. So can someone, it could be more than one person, can you share with me what your definition of sex positivity is? You know, I can call people out.
Let's not all go at once.
I can just call names now. We can.
Definitely, that's not all, but I'll give my definition. Sex positivity is being okay with yourself when it comes to sex, being self-aware, being okay with saying no, knowing what your wants, your likes and dislikes are, and not giving hell or forward or backwards what anyone else thinks of that, as long as you're being safe with it and you enjoy it. That for me is sex positivity.
Yeah.
That's a great definition. Actually, I think that sums that up.
Yeah.
So Miss Tamika, now we
I
come
agree. I agree wholeheartedly with Alannah's point. I think that that we should all just be kind of free to be in the skin that we're in through our changes, through our evolution, through our maturity. We should be able to be in our bodies, experience our senses for the sake of pleasure. And so there are some bodily autonomy elements in sex positivity, if you ask me. But in essence, it's just our right and our innate nature to be comfortable in our bodies and to be able to freely express ourselves when it comes to pleasure and the things that make us happy.
So Miss Tamika, just take this to another question. So what role does body autonomy play in sexual health?
I mean, how can I ensure my my sexual health without having full control over the choices to be made. So for an example, if I see it in my benefit or in my best interest to seek abortion care in my current state, in the state that it's in, if I'm past 6 weeks, I got a problem. So I can't even fully express myself sexually because, here I am, pregnancy is obviously a byproduct of sex on some occasions, out of fear of what that looks like based on what decisions I need to make. I don't feel free to be who I am. So, the role that bodily autonomy plays in sex positivity is huge, because how can I be positive and confident in my sexuality when I can't make decisions about my body in the long run as a result of actually engaging? It one goes with the other.
Correct. And so, Ms. Allanah, this brings me to you. So what are some things we can do to create a safe and empowering environment for melanated women with HIV to discuss their sexual desires, concerns, and experiences?
Wow. I love this question because I think I proposed it. And one of the biggest things I'm always big on is creating a safe space to discuss these topics. One of my current programs I oversee are for Black women living with HIV. And one of the things we realized that was a topic of concern as we were working with the ladies, that their sexual health, sexual positivity, they continuously scored low on it. So we had a wonderful workshop just discussing just to be self-positive with sex and enjoy sex and have those conversations of what it feels like living with HIV, and then being the sexual component, because we all know oftentimes being HIV positive is a byproduct of sex for some of us. So for those women, they score low. And then because it's kind of around sex and it's still that close off isolation that our women feel. So I think one of the biggest space is, particularly for Black women, we love a village, right? We have our sisters, we have that crowd around us, and to have that peer support and have women around us and to have those open, honest conversation is the biggest, I think, first step with providing that safe space and environment for women.
Absolutely. Actually, if I can jump in, I think Allanah raised a very good point around the community and the village that it takes. And as an ally of women living with HIV, I'm often preaching the gospel of you equals you. We've come so long in the science around HIV. It's the stigma that we got so much work to do with.
Right.
In essence, if you really equals you, and we all accept that and we all understand that, then women living with HIV have just as much a right to pleasure as anyone else. And what I don't see in these conversations enough is conversations around pleasure. It's like we just want to drill treatment. Okay, we got that. I'm undetectable. Let's talk about what makes me happy, what turns me on now. And, let's create dating sites for people living with HIV so we can be open and honest and start having these conversations, because these people are just as entitled to love and pleasure as anyone else.
I agree. And this question is for anybody. So what are some ways then that we can educate people on how to have healthy, pleasurable sex without infusing our personal values onto them?
You want to speak on it, doctor?
I think it's such a big question, right? But I think it's one that's important. So I would say part of all of what we're talking about is how do we reduce stigma and how do we reduce shame so that people feel empowered to actually have the kind of sex that they want to have. And so I think part of this, when, we say what we want this to look like, I think for me, it's looking at what are our biomedical interventions that we can use and we can put into play. It's about how are we in community and conversation with folks and talking about specifically what sex means, what pleasure means, how we are able to do this, right? One of my favorite things that happens on the internet is that folks say, this phrase, don't let a man masturbate with your body, right? And I love that phrase because it gets at the core of one, the orgasm gap that exists between men and women, but two, like this conversation looks very different in a context of LGBT plus population, specifically lesbians, because lesbians don't complain about the same sexual dissatisfaction, the same kinds of shame, the same kinds of stigma that heterosexual women tend to talk about. And so I think part of it is this is less about our values, right? My values and what I feel and what I think is not important. I'm a Southern Belle and I'm a Southern Belle who's having sex. Okay. Period. End of discussion. If you want to have a conversation about abstinence, get somebody else to do it because life is too short and I'm not your girl. And so I think part of that is we need to center the safety and the comfort of people when we say that we're meeting their needs or we're trying to be community oriented or we want to support folks, right? For me as a researcher and a scholar, the biggest thing the pandemic revealed for me is that people are going to do exactly what they want to do, whether it's safe or not. So it's our responsibility, instead of saying you should just be safe. No, I'm going to create the conditions and the opportunities for you to be safe because you're going to make the decision you've already decided on anyway. And so I think that's a big piece of how we help to educate folks around having healthy sex. I think the other part is us removing this idea that talking about sex is somehow impersonal or disgusting or something that we shouldn't do or something that we should avoid, right? Ashley, one of my favorite things about following you on Instagram is you are going to have the hard conversation, whether people want to have that conversation or not. And so I think for me, part of this is about pushing us to have conversations about what sex is, what things look like. How do we get to know our bodies, right? There's a lot of legislating of women's bodies and not a lot of knowing about how women's bodies actually work. And so we need to get back to the core of some of the beginning of this, which is quite literally, what do I need? What do I want? And how do I center that in my interactions with people? Because condom negotiation has the word negotiation in it for a reason. A lot of us are having sex, but we don't even feel comfortable to tell the person we're sleeping with that you should put on a condom. Why is that? Right? If I don't feel empowered to speak and use my voice, should I actually be doing this is the first question. And the second one, if we're in a dangerous situation or we're not able to ask that question, should be, what are the steps I can take to protect myself in this dynamic?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Brittany, you talked about the biomedical advances, right? And so one of the biomedical advances that I personally use is PrEP, right? And I like to tell women, particularly Black women, that PrEP is for you because it puts the control of your sexual health back into your hands. And so, ladies, what is your experience, if any, with PrEP?
I'll just jump right back in, right, and say, you know, I'm a personal PrEP user. I've been on and off of PrEP since 2018. And the reason it's been on and off is because of some of the responses I've gotten from care providers because I've moved around a lot, right? Getting PrEP in Atlanta is much easier than it was for me getting it in Minnesota. It's way easier than it was for me getting it in Vermont, where I'm living now. And so I've had to do a lot of negotiation to be able to have access to that. And so for people watching, PrEP is a once daily pill or injectable that you can take to lower your risk of HIV. And PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis, pre meaning before, right? So we trying to sort of mitigate this before we even get to a point of needing treatment, right? And so much like you, Ashley, I think about this as this is something else in my arsenal and my toolkit that I can use in the same way that I use birth control. I don't want to have children, so I got an IUD. I don't want to contract HIV and I want to have really good, healthy sex. So I'm going to take PrEP, right? And so for me, those two things go hand in hand. And they're just another way for me to be able to have sexual intercourse and also feel like I don't have to wake up the next day like, oh my God, what did I do? Or, oh my God, I'm so worried, right? The number of women I've had to counsel simply because I'm someone who speaks openly about being a cisgender woman who's on PrEP. Like I get DMs from strangers every day about, oh my God, what do I do? And then I'm having a conversation about what PEP is. And I'm trying to teach people all of these different things. And part of it for me is this is about each one teach one, right? If I know about this, I'm on this, I'm able to use it. I feel a social and moral obligation to then share that with the rest of the community, which is how I ended up starting to research things like PrEP among Black college women. Because you know, Black women account for more than 58% of women who are living with HIV, but less than 10 or 20% of us are actually on PrEP, know about PrEP, can articulate what PrEP is. That's a wide gap and a wide disparity that shouldn't exist. And so I think for me, you know, when I think of what are my experiences around PrEP? 1 is that I'm a personal user. 2 is that I'm a researcher on it. And 3, girl, if you got questions, hit me up, because we need to create opportunities for us to have conversations around these things that don't always involve going to a doctor, because sometimes doctors don't know, right? There are a lot of providers who are still learning. And sometimes we want to make sure we have enough information and we're armed with some of those personal stories that can really help us to better understand what the full range of our options are.
So, Dr. Brittany, I'm about to get in your business a little bit, right? So,
come on, I'm with it.
How has being on PrEP gave you the confidence in your sexual health choices? Did it improve it?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, right? So I actually started on PrEP because I have been in committed relationships with 2 men who were living with HIV.
Okay.
So U equals U, I've subscribed to that from the very beginning. And I thought about what are some other ways that, in addition to believing in U equals U, that I can add something else to my toolkit that makes me feel safe and comfortable. And so even though I'm not dating either one of those folks anymore, when I think about my future and sort of what I want my long-term healthcare to look like, this is like my option where I can do something about it. What was the other part of your question?
It was, how does it give you confidence in your sexual health choices?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's one less thing for me to worry about right now. Yeah. Obviously, PrEP is not something that's going to prevent syphilis or gonorrhea or any of these other sexually transmitted infections, right? It's about lowering your HIV risk. But for me, it's one less thing to worry about, 1. And then 2, it's a testament to just how far biomedical interventions have come, right? I have had a personal relationship with the HIV crisis since I was a 4-year-old child when my favorite uncle passed away from AIDS. And I couldn't imagine in 1994 that we would even have these kind of biomedical interventions that we have now. So folks get to live full lives. PrEP allows me to be able to engage with folks without necessarily feeling like I have to feel stigma or shame or anxiety, right? I think anxiety is something that comes up for a lot of Black women if, when, and after we've had sexual intercourse, and we don't even know what to do with all of those feelings. And so for me, this is just one less thing I got to worry about. And on top of that, I'm still going to get tested, and I'm still going to have conversations with my partners, and I'm still going to ask people that I'm sexually active with, how often are you getting tested? When do you get tested? How many partners do you have, right? These are normal pieces of the conversation for me. And this just also makes me feel good because sometimes people be lying. And so this is my way to give myself some extra security.
So, Miss Allanah, Dr. Brittany talked about shame, guilt around sex and HIV and all those things. So how can we challenge societal norms and stereotypes that perpetuate shame, guilt, and low self-esteem among melanated women with HIV?
So one of my biggest conversations I've been having is, while working with our ladies, we noticed that they have young women that are engaging in sex, but no one is really having that open and honest conversation with them. So we find ourselves having to be the one to have those conversations. So they're like, oh, can you talk to my daughter? Can you have this conversation with them? Have the damn conversation. I am sick of us acting as if, I think one of my colleagues said it, as if sex doesn't happen, right? I think it was Brittany, Ms. Williams, who said, no, sex happens. Like, we are all a product of sex. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for sex. Challenge those societal norms is having campaigns that have those conversations and not remove sex from it. You know, I think particularly with HIV, I was working with one of the other initiatives that have the similar grant as us, and they removed the word HIV for some of their campaign posters. And I was like, isn't that perpetuating the stigma and the shame if we remove it? Right? Because we don't want to give people pamphlets with HIV. Even the conversation at our clinic is, we don't want to have things up that's having conversation with HIV because we don't want the kid next to us to ask what that is. And I'm like, that's a perfect segue to talk to our kids about what it is. You don't have to have the full in-blown conversation, but you can explain what it is. And that helps remove the stigma and societal things that we see when it comes to having conversation around sex. We all know it happens. Once we hit puberty, everybody starts tingling. Why are we not having those open and honest conversations? And it's through campaigns, through our doctor's office where the kids are, starting having the conversation in school. I think sex ed is so important that I don't know what it looks like in the South. I'm originally from New York. But one of the things the programs that I've worked at, I've seen them go into schools as long as junior high school and having those healthy sex conversations, because abstinence doesn't really happen.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can jump in, there are a couple of things. So what you just talked about, Allanah, in my state, okay, the adolescent children are not getting comprehensive sex education. At Georgia is considered an abstinent state. And so what they're doing is they're showing the children images of herpes breakouts and telling them, hey, this is what happens when you have sex. So they're literally trying to scare them, I guess, if you will, out of having sex. And it's not working. Okay. And it's showing up in our rates of teenage pregnancy, as well as the rates of transmission of STIs, including HIV, amongst adolescent youth. So having this conversation and being candid is one thing, especially us as parents, as leaders, as advocates in our community. But we also have to fight policy that is detrimental, to health outcomes. We have to demand comprehensive sex education for our children in schools and stop it with these old religious doctrines that aren't serving us at all. In addition to that, when we go back to the question around how do we teach about this without infusing those personal beliefs and those old religious doctrines and values, we have to focus on people-centered language. We have to use language that is inclusive, that considers all experiences, because not all people in the room are having heteronormative sexual experiences. We have to consider these things when we're doing these curriculums and doing these trainings and education to say, based on the diversity of this room, what does this language need to look like? And there is language that is inclusive, that is appropriate, for all experiences, where we can deal with just the facts and we can stop infusing it with our, old inundated beliefs around sex. We're one of the countries where it's still so taboo when you go to other places, and they're so much more open about it because it's such a natural part of the human experience.
And sometimes if you don't know what language to use, you can simply just ask or be receptive to people telling you what's appropriate. So for example, I did a workshop last week. And so I'm normally using stuff like penis owner, vulva owner, right? And so one of the participants raised their hand and they was like, could I use more inclusive language? And so I asked, I was like, so what would that inclusive language be? Mm-hmm. And so they were like, they felt more comfortable if I used any or an outie. And see, I never heard that terminology before. And I was like, okay, I'm learning here. So
what that's called is meeting people where they are.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do. That's the basis of people-centered language, getting the feedback and then making the adjustment in real time.
Right. And so for that whole presentation, I use the term any and outie.
I like it.
Yeah. Even though it was new for me, I was like, okay, maybe I don't quite understand, but this is what makes you feel comfortable. This is what I'm going to go with. So yeah. So I agree with that.
Absolutely. And there was also something else that Allanah and honestly Dr. Williams raised as it relates to PrEP. Going back to this idea of people-centered language as an advocate, when they come and they say, well, why aren't Black women taking PrEP? Why are the numbers so low? Well, first of all, is the language people-centered? You're calling it pre-exposure prophylaxis still.
No one knows what that is.
How does that translate? You know what I mean? How does that work? You're getting feedback from people in terms of why they don't take it. So you've done all the research and all the surveys. They don't want to commit to another pill because we already do that with birth control. So keep the research going and include us in clinical trials. I can't wait for the day that we have on-demand PrEP. So 2 hours before or an hour before I decide to have sex, I can pop it, because I know I'm about to, and I can do it this day. I don't have to do it tomorrow, and it's just as effective. They're getting the feedback. They need to take that feedback and listen to it and make sure they're using language that will translate for the masses, because pre-exposure prophylaxis is not it.
In their defense, right? I'm not defending Big Pharma, but in their defense, right? We have to be honest and say that the reason probably why they don't have as many Black folk in studies is Black folk don't do studies, right? Mm-hmm. Like they had to for aptitude, they had to go to Africa, where they already had people who were already willing to do it. You tell folk we're doing a study for this shot that goes into your ass for you not get HIV. People will be like, I don't know about that. Just think about the COVID vaccine, right? Mm-hmm. With the COVID vaccine, I heard so many people like, I don't know about that. And they might have been some validity there, but there was so much pushback from people that I know. Like, I don't know, they was like really waiting for people to take the vaccine and then see what's going to happen to them first, and then like, okay, well, y'all didn't die, so let me go ahead and get the vaccine. So in Big Pharma's defense, a lot of Black people, we don't trust them, and rightfully so. So we're not really jumping to be first in line for any type of studies.
When it's
can I jump in?
That's a fair assessment, yeah.
I think I want to yes and this, right? This is what I do in my classrooms, right? We got to yes and this. I think the and piece is that part of what we're talking about is a legacy of medical mistrust that Black people have, rightfully so. We have been wronged by the medical establishment for so long. And as recently in some developing world nations, as like 2013, the US government was apologizing for testing out various kinds of birth control on folks. So we're talking about things that are both a part of a longer history, but also things that have happened in recent times. And so I think, yes, that's a real thing. And the other piece is the only folks who are going to save our lives are ourselves. And so I think for me, part of where the conversation has to shift from is not just this legacy and lineage of what has happened to us, but also what do we do about protecting ourselves to exist in the future? What does a future of Black liberation and Black existence and Black love look like without HIV? Like, that's where I'm trying to get to. How do we get to that point, right? And I don't mean in terms of like getting rid of HIV people. I mean, quite literally, how do we mitigate and end the HIV epidemic so that we can have a generation of young people who know what it feels like to have sex and have pleasure and be able to engage one another without the fear of HIV and without the shame related to that. I think the other piece is there's a long-standing exclusion until very recently of women in some of the conversations around PrEP. I was on PrEP for 2 years before I had ever saw a woman in a PrEP commercial. And I remember I had met someone from Gilead and I was like, yo, put me in a commercial. Still hasn't happened, which is fine. I'm glad they found somebody, right? At least somebody is in the commercial, but there needs to be a diversity and range of people who are represented in some of these commercials about PrEP, of folks who are in these marketing and ad campaigns. It's the same kind of people over and over. And so one of the things that I know, because I'm talking about this all day, I'm reading about this all the time, I'm able to have conversations with people who work at places like AIDS United and other organizations all the time. I'm in this, so I know enough to be able to make an informed decision. An everyday Black woman doesn't have that same access, doesn't have that same time, and doesn't have the same resources. So how do I make this clear? How do I make it plain? And how do I sort of reduce the barriers that are related to this? And one of the major barriers that I hear from folks all the time is related to cost of PrEP, right? So PrEP is available. Some people will say, well, the copay on my insurance is too high. And that's where I jump in and I say, boom, well, actually, there's a copay card from the medical manufacturers that you can add on top of your health insurance. For as long as I've been on PrEP, I've never paid for it. Not $1, not 1 cent, not 1 penny, not 1 nickel, not nothing. I ain't doing it. I'm going to take it, but I ain't paying for it. And so for me, it was about how do I figure out ways to manage the cost associated with this? There are all kinds of PrEP programs in various cities and places, depending on where you are geographically. And so part of it is about, we need to make it clear and plain. This is 1, what PrEP is. 2, this is how you get to it. And 3, this is how we get it for free 99, because Black folks going to show up for something that's free 99. And I think we need to be real about the fact that there's a social class component in this, and there's a reason for that.
Dr. Williams, I've been seeing my same gynecologist for the last 16 years, and he has never, ever asked me about PrEP. I've got all kind of screenings and panels and, all the things. He done delivered a baby for me, all the things. And he has never, ever mentioned PrEP. How do we get providers on board with this push?
Providers, one, have to stop practicing in their biases. Like a lot of them feel like, well, because I know you, or well, you're married, so you don't need this. A lot of them are still biased about it. They feel like you have to be display risky behavior, whatever that is, in order to get it. So a lot of them still function in that. Yes, Miss Allanah.
I was just agreeing with you. They are, if it's an old school provider, they are definitely stuck in that. Well, if she's married, then I think I've only had one provider. I mean, in New York, they always offer the full panel. Like, HIV is just one of the panels that they run when you go for your preventative. But getting healthcare out here, it wasn't one of the things that was asked. One. Mm-hmm. But two, I realized when I went in for further tests, I was not feeling well. She finally said to me, let's run all the STIs. And I was shocked because she's never asked that before. But I don't know if it was because if I wasn't feeling well. But again, it's like the providers miss those conversations if you're married. And like you said, don't display risky behaviors. And that's if they're asking about risky behaviors.
And then too, again, not to make excuses for the providers, but because I do presentations about PrEP to providers, I also understand that a lot of them have not been trained in how to have sexual conversations with their patients at all anyway. So, you would think that I thought prior to me doing these presentations that I thought providers somewhere in med school had a class on how to talk about sexual health. They don't. So a lot of them, this is new to them too. They don't even know how to have the conversation. They don't know where to start. They're uncomfortable, like they sweating. They don't know. So just give them a little grace. A lot of them are learning as we're learning. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I found that to be true in my experience. I've never had a provider ask me about it, but I've also had to educate a lot of providers. And so actually, unfortunately, the place I've experienced the most pushback was in a gynecologist's office because they're like, whoa, we don't do that here. And so I actually got my first PrEP prescription after having to leave a women's clinic to go to another provider that saw men who have sex with men. And it was interesting because one of the first questions she asked me when I explained that I wanted to be on PrEP was whether or not I was a sex worker. And I was like, well, no. And that goes back to what Ashley's talking about and how for so long we've associated these preventative measures with people who are engaging in risky behavior, to which my question is, if you have sex, isn't there a risk anyway? And so I think part of it is we are taking this very old school mindset of, this old school mindset that in order for you to need this prescription, there's something wrong with you or there's something that you need to do. And so for me, as someone who presents, I have a PhD, I can decide when and where I want to code switch. I sometimes wear designer clothes to go to the doctor because I feel like I'll be taken more seriously, which is a whole different conversation about medical racism, right? There are all of these intentional things that I do to communicate that I'm a middle-class Black woman to a healthcare provider. And then I think that sort of backfires on me because then the assumption is either one, are you this middle-class Black woman because you're a sex worker? Or two, I don't understand why someone like you would need this. And so we need to move away from this idea that there's a particular kind of population that should have access to PrEP. PrEP is for everybody. Right? I'm a yoga girly. I'm a hot yoga girl. And I love when they say yoga is for everybody. Hashtag PrEP is too. And so yes, all PrEP, right? To borrow from some of the internet phrases. And so I think for me, that piece is important. I think the other part is how much we do or don't allow space for these conversations to happen in everyday life. So my Tinder profile says that I'm on PrEP. My Instagram says that I'm a PrEP advocate. I talk about this with people immediately when I meet them. And I usually end up spending a lot of time and a lot of energy explaining to folks what PrEP is, because I don't feel any shame or grief or weirdness about having to disclose that I'm a personal PrEP user. And so I think for me, there are women who don't feel as safe and as comfortable with being able to do that. I've talked to a lot of women who said, I'm dating someone or I'm partnering with someone and they would absolutely not treat me the same way if they found out that I was on this. And I was like, great, so don't tell them. Right. And so I am not in a position of judging women for the decisions that they're making about the kind of people they're partnering with. That's not my responsibility. But what is my responsibility is helping you figure out, how do you get this? Right, girl, please put it in the Flintstones vitamin bottle if you need to. Right. Let's talk about what are some strategies and ways for us to work around this, which is why I really like the idea of injectable PrEP, because if I can run out and you only need it, every month, the first 2 months, and after that it's every 2 months. Oh, I'm running to the doctor, babe. I'll be back. And it's nobody else's business what's happening with you because they don't see you take it every day. They're not in your face as you're doing it. So if you're someone that needs a little bit more privacy and safety and comfort, I love that we keep having these advancements and options that are popping up for people to be able to do some of that. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, all of that.
It's also more opportunities for us to break down these walls of stigma. We got to stop it. Why would anybody feel a way about me choosing to do something to protect my sexual health? Like, stop it already. And
you don't trust me?
They're uneducated themselves.
Exactly. And it's also because it's attached to HIV that the avalanche of stigma comes tumbling down. And I think it's more and more opportunities for us as the people that we are in this field to break that down and say, hey, you got this all wrong. This is not where we are. You still 30 years ago, and this is where we are today.
So I made a post months ago, last year sometime, about I'm on PrEP, right? And I explained what PrEP was in the post. I explained it, and I explained that I was HIV negative and all these things in the post, right? It got all this engagement, and I got all these inboxes because people thought I was positive, which is fine. But what that tells me is, one, people don't read. Two, people assume because you're taking a medication for HIV, is automatically assume, oh, you must be positive, right? And so that let me, and so I kind of understand from just that point of view. Like, I work in sex, pleasure, and HIV for a living, so I can tell people. I talk about this all the time. People who I date, they know what I do for a living, so they're not really taken aback by anything that comes out my mouth, right? But as a lay person who has a regular job, who maybe is not as comfortable, like Brittany said, I can see sometimes how where the shame and stigma comes. Like, I don't know, because people are going to assume that I have HIV. Like me, the educator, posted on Instagram, and people literally were in my inbox telling me they were happy that they didn't know that was my story, and they're happy that I shared my story. And I was like, girl, what story? Like, what are you talking about? Like, so I get it. I understand why people are reluctant to share or try to like tell people, because they don't want people to make assumptions, because people will assume real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. I think for me, the other piece is I ain't no ways tired about somebody making an assumption that I have HIV. Like, okay, you made that assumption, and whether it's right or wrong, I don't care unless that has a real implication for my physical safety and my overall health.
Right.
People can run around and they can make whatever assumptions and ideas and beliefs and whatever they want to. And people who are actually listening are going to be the people that I'm targeting. And so I always think about this in terms of, if I can get one more person to be more informed on PrEP in a conversation with 20 people, and that one person can get another person in a conversation with 20 people, and we keep this going, eventually we'll reach a point where there's a critical mass of us who know what's actually going on, and we can continue that education forward. And so I don't know, I guess I've just never felt like I cared if someone made an assumption that I have HIV when I'm sitting here telling you I'm on an HIV prevention medication. Put differently, I tell people you don't take birth control when you're pregnant, so why would I take PrEP if I have HIV?
Same here as an ally to women living with HIV, being in spaces with them and, loving on them and taking pictures with them and really, really being in that energy, because y'all, it's just amazing. If you want to be with a group of people who really appreciate life, you know what I'm saying? So I'm with these women, I'm celebrating with them, and people make assumptions all the time. And I think it's an opportunity for me to say, first of all, what's the difference? Okay. In our experiences, especially in this country. And it's also an opportunity to talk about you equals you. There is an opportunity to talk about, even treatment as prevention, because working together, those that are HIV positive and those that are negative, to spread the same message of where we are with HIV in this current state helps us to continue to dispel that stigma. I think that's where most of the work is. And also, in addition to what we talked about in terms of getting providers on board, having these conversations regularly, offering comprehensive sex education in schools, there are a lot of nuances and components. But I think that stigma thing is so huge for us. And all of these that we're discussing are opportunities for us to set people straight, because we just still have it wrong.
And I think, too, part of it is you have to get people to be able to see themselves and see that. I think it's a disconnect. Like, a lot of people feel like, oh, well, I'm not doing anything that's going to, I'm going to acquire HIV. They feel like it's a disconnect. Oh, that's just them. Like, I've heard people say when people share their stories, people are like, oh, well, I'm not a sex worker, or I didn't do that. But I tell people, there are two types of people in the world, right? You have people who are HIV positive and people who are HIV possible. So if you are having sex, my dear, you are HIV possible. Because the only thing you need to do to acquire HIV is to be having sex and be human. That's
right.
it. That's it. So, and then once like I break it down like that, people are like, oh yeah, I guess yeah.
You and know, one of my favorite questions to ask, Ashley, is what does it look like? You know, what does HIV positivity look like? What face does it have? You know, because we're just not in that time anymore. I've met so many beautiful and gorgeous women that live with HIV that literally get told by people when they're out doing their advocacy work, oh, you don't look like you have HIV. Mm-hmm. You know, what does it look like? So this is the work. Like, and like Dr. Williams said, is one conversation at a time, because that person is definitely going to tell another person and say, you know, I just had this conversation, and that's how we break it down one by one.
Yeah, I think the other piece for me is this isn't hypothetical. Like, I've literally dated people who are HIV positive. I'm not speaking about this from the abstract. This is not me advocating for people doing something that I haven't done myself before. The same thing with taking PrEP. So I'm only telling people to do something that I have already done. And I tell folks all the time, don't let something like HIV get in the way of you finding love. If you have a partner who's willing to do the work, to be in care, to reach you equals you, and to be able to have intimacy. And so I had to answer a lot of questions from people, you know, well, if you wanted to have a baby, could you have a baby with someone who's HIV positive? And so I do all of this teaching around. One, the answer is yes. Okay. For those of you who are out there watching. And two, yes, you can have a baby who is HIV negative, even if you're a person who's living with HIV or your partner has HIV. Right. And so I spend a lot of time dispelling these myths from this sort of 1980s, 1990s understanding of what HIV and living with HIV looks like, in part because the people, even though I'm no longer with them, I love them. Those are folks that I saw myself spending my life with. And so for me, as someone in that relationship, I owed it to them to do the work myself. But now I also owe it to the entire HIV positive community to continue doing that work for people who might come into contact with them, so that they have one less negative or harmful or horrible interaction with someone who's misinformed or uninformed or otherwise ill-informed about what it means to engage with somebody who's living with HIV.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Does anybody have any input on that? We'll move on to the next question if we're not.
There was something that was missed on the front end of the conversation that I'm just curious about, and that was Dr. Williams' ideas around sex positivity. Like, how do you define that? I think we missed you on the front end of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I aligned with a lot of what y'all are saying. I think for me, probably something that I would add on to that is part of sex positivity for me is about releasing this internal shame and internal stigma that we have, but also about pushing boundaries. Right? Mm-hmm. Sex is supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be intimate. It's supposed to be a way for you to get in touch with not only you, but also the partners that you are engaging with. And so I think for me, my definition of sex positivity is always going to include testing boundaries, learning boundaries, and sticking to boundaries once we know what they are. Mm-hmm. And we can't do that if we don't have a space to feel comfortable talking about sex, if we don't have a space to feel comfortable interacting and being forthcoming with our partners, right? It's amusing to me that I even end up in spaces like this, or that I ended up being someone who has, you know, dated folks who are living with HIV and now studies PrEP and all of these other things, in part because I feel like this is the path I was always on. I was raised by a mother who spoke very openly with me about sex. My mom still asks me very uncomfortable questions about sex. We were watching a movie the other day and she asked me a really wild question and I had to answer it and explain it to her. And I was like, okay, this feels weird. This feels icky, but I'm still going to go with it because that's part of what, for me, sex positivity is. It's been modeled in my home. It's been modeled in my relationships with people. I have an aunt who works for the Fulton DeKalb Health Authority. Like, I have, you know, all of these people that I'm in contact with who do this kind of what I think of as life-saving and life-changing work. So for me, it was inevitable that I would, one, feel and subscribe to a sex positive approach on life, but two, it is what it is also part of what my definition of sex positivity looks like, right? I grew up on Trina. I'm a big Sex and the City fan. I love me some Sasha Snow from Sex Life on Netflix. Like, Holly, if you hear me, those are my kind of characters and the kind of people that I want to see on TV because they're living out the life that I live. Like, I enjoyed my 20s, period. I'm enjoying my 30s, period. And so I think part of the way that we sort of get to this point is unlearning, relearning, and being willing to do all of that. And all of those things are deeply tied into sex positivity. I think the last piece I would add is that it's also about resources, right? How do I create and facilitate and allow myself to engage with the resources that I know are available for me to be able to live a full and healthy life when I'm having sex and engaging in sex and thinking about sex, with whatever that might be, whether you want to be somebody in the life, by which I mean BDSM, or if you want to do some other things, just to, throw some stuff out there.
Okay, now I hear you, girl.
So that brings us to our last question of the evening. So how does self-love and sexual health intersect? And this is for anybody. It's anybody you want to.
I mean, well, we've definitely talked about this in terms of me prioritizing my sexual health and choosing, PrEP and that type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
But to go even further, I think that the idea of fully accepting and fully loving every part of myself kind of goes hand in hand with that sex positivity. Like the full acceptance and the full embrace of all that we are, our quirks, those things that make us scare, as well as those things that turn us on, like fully loving all of that. To me, the byproduct of that is sex positivity. So it's like, those are the intersections. While self-love can include a range of themes and topics like, diet and nutrition and meditation and all those things, sex is as natural to my existence as food. Okay. And so we got to stop leaving it last or leaving it out or having it separate. And so in that same way, Dr. Williams, I have a 15-year-old daughter that we openly talk, about these things, about sex. And we've been doing this with her since she was a young child. And now she's at her high school passing out condoms and talking to her friends like, no, girl, you're not supposed to use it again. Once you use it, you got to throw it away. Just offering these tidbits that she's learned from mom and my experience. But the idea is that when we fully embrace and love who we are, that just comes with a certain liberation. And that liberation definitely includes, what pleases us sexually.
It does. Also, I feel like when you fully love yourself, it's just certain things you're just not going to allow, right? Like, when I fully came into the fullness of who I am and I love myself, I'm not going to allow you to run up in me. And I don't know if last time you've been tested. Like, I'm just not going to do that because I love me, right? I love all of me. In order to do that, I need to make sure that you also are doing what you're supposed to do. So that way I can still remain as healthy as possible. So.
Yeah, I think the other piece is what's interesting for me, interesting for me about this. There we go. My brain and my lips are not in unison, y'all. We are not connected. But, I think about pop culture and music, right? Everybody got WAP, everybody juicy this. It's all about, I'ma do this, that, and the third to my partner. Nobody do it like me, whatever. And then the last time we had a quality song that's talking about sexual health and safety was Let's Talk About Sex from TLC. Girl, what are we doing? And so I think for me, where self-love and sort of sexual health intersect for me is that I feel like you're never going to have quality sex until you fully love who you are. You accept what your desires are and you allow yourself to sort of exist in the fullness of those things. Sure, you might orgasm. Sure, you might have a good time. Sure, you might feel good or be able to make someone else feel good. But that does not mean that you are having the highest quality, best possible sex that you can have, because at the end of it, you feel bad. Later on, you feel shame. You're constantly anxious and you're worried. And so everything that we're talking about today is part of what goes into our toolkit of reducing some of those negative feelings and those sources of stigma and shame that we might have to interact with, while also thinking about, did I do everything humanly possible within my arsenal and within my toolkit to protect myself? And so I don't know what that answer looks like. I'm waiting on a new artist to give us a song and to give us some representation that talks about having sex and enjoying sex, and this is how I'm doing it safely, because I don't feel like that's a part of the conversation right now. And the reality is STI rates outside of HIV are dramatically on the rise right now across the country, especially in the southeastern part of the United States. So folks are having sex. They're
and
doing
also,
it.
especially in the aftermath of COVID, like we saw the numbers shoot up during COVID, and they have not slowed down.
I mean, they were all isolated. What is one of the biggest things people do when they're stressed, right? They have sex. You're happy, you're sad, you're in a bad mood, you tend to have sex. I think self-love, definitely, just to piggyback off what all you ladies said, self-love definitely comes along with it. Once you love yourself, self-care, you know what you're not okay with. You know what boundaries you don't want people to cross, and you're okay with letting them know that. I think once we're self-aware of things that we're not okay with, things that we do like, then we can speak up for ourselves. And I think PrEP, we're having this conversation about PrEP, is one of the biggest harm reduction factors we can do to take care of ourselves. Again, we might trust our partners, but we are not with our partners 24/7. We are not. We're just not. We don't know what they're doing 24/7. And part of the ways we can reduce that perpetual harm that might come to us by taking care of ourselves with self-love is using PrEP. And I think once people get the wheels turning with that, because we are having sex, we're not going to stop having sex. We need sex to kind of procreate, right? That's kind of the byproduct. So once biological things start working unconsciously, we're going to do it. Whether we think about it or not, our bodies kind of force us to do it. So why not have the things in place to reduce some of the harms that comes along with the byproduct of doing it?
Absolutely. And I think for me, the yes and to what you're saying, Allanah, is I'm not having sex for procreation. There will be no procreation in Dr. Brit's life ever. # child free for life. However, and although I think the other piece is this is also an option and an opportunity for us to really figure out, how do I engage the world with an ethic of care that I would want other people to engage with me? How do I make sure that I'm informed and I'm meeting people where they are and I'm talking to my partners and I'm exercising these things that I would want for other people to exercise with me? And so, I think all of this goes back to, I want, like for me, Dr. Brit, my wish is for Black women to have whole, fulfilling, loving, fun, exciting sex lives. And we can't do that until we reduce our stigma and shame, until we have more information, until we are able to be in community and care and show up for one another.
Okay, ladies.
Unapologetically to that end, like,
yes,
unapologetically be our self and our sexual health at that.
So, ladies, I would like for you to close out with your social media handle, if you're on social media. If you're not, then a website or wherever we can find you. Let us know your name again and then where we can find you. Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in. We can go in reverse order. I'm Dr. Brit Williams. You can find me online at Dr. Brit with 1 T Williams on all social platforms. And I'm here. I'm all about it. If you got questions, comments, concerns, or something else that start with a C, let me know.
I am new to social media. I only joined because I have a teenager that was adamant about being on it, and I needed a way to follow and track her activity. So I'm going to give you my social media handle, but don't expect much because I'm a little shy when it comes to the social media platforms. But you can find me on Instagram at @TMignonOnday. That's in all French, and that's TMIGNONANGLAIS on Instagram.
It's very sexy.
I wanted to make it as inconspicuous as possible, girl. I don't want any of my ex-boyfriends to find me. I'm a wholesome woman now.
You did. Allanah?
Well, I would say I'm on social media, but not on social media. But I'm also one of those social media people that, if you haven't seen the meme, is my life at work and my life outside of work. So I'm not going to give y'all my social media handle. But if you do need to reach me, feel free to send me an email. My email address is Sam, ALEWIS at LEWIS Sherry, CHERY. Don't tell my husband I forgot that. At gmh.edu. Or listen, pick up the phone and call. I prefer a conversation, 404-616-6078. Any questions that you have with regards to living with HIV, sexual health, I really would love to see more initiative focusing on our youth, because it's a topic of conversation that we consistently see coming up. And if we're really wanting to help end the stigma, then we need to start with those that the population keeps forgetting about, and we are still seeing those rates increasing.
That's right.
And my name is Ashley Cobb. Again, I'm your favorite friend in filth, and you can follow me on all platforms at Sex with Ashley. And I talk about sex, women, and pleasure. So, thank you, ladies, for joining us
This
tonight.
has been such a pleasure. Like, no pun intended. Actually, pun intended. But this has been such a pleasure. Like, we have to do this again. I'm with Allanah, that we got to find a way to talk to the young ladies. And
men.
That's right. We have to have men in these conversations. So important. There's so much of this that we could talk about for days. So let's make a plan to do it again.
I agree. I had a great time, and definitely shout out you ladies for having me. I've worked with Ashley before. I mentioned that workshop. She did an amazing job with just hosting that sexual pleasure workshops. Our ladies had such a great time. Ashley, I must bring you back because they're like, when is she coming back? I have to figure schedule out, but thank you again for having me. This was very exciting, and I do hope that, this conversation reach one, teach one. Is it each one, teach one, reach one, teach one? Something like that. But definitely, yeah. So, yeah. And it's a conversation that we definitely need to continue to have.